Welcome to one of the best episodes of the Enterprise GTM podcast, your essential guide to cracking the enterprise market and building a business that lasts. In this episode, Diamond Bishop, the former founder of Augmend, who sold his company to Datadog, shares some of his hard-learned lessons building developer tools. He covers a range of topics such as how to approach sales, the reality of enterprise sales cycles, and how to better prepare for those as an early-stage startup, product implementation challenges such as data access issues, and the future of AI-powered automation along with the evolving role of AI agents in enterprise software. There's a lot to learn today, so let's get right into it. Diamond, welcome to the Enterprise GTM podcast. Really excited to have you here today. We plan to cover a broad set of topics about your career, what you're doing currently, as well as of course, things related to AI. Before we dive in, why don't you give everybody a quick run through of your professional journey leading up to your current role at Datadog, Diamond?
Yeah. Hey, happy to be here. Very excited. Yeah, I've been in machine learning or AI for like 15 years or so now. I've started my career working in defense tech while they were paying for my grad school at Lockheed. And then kind of quickly realized I didn't want to do a PhD. That was not for me. So I left with a master's, but we were studying machine learning back then. Mostly we were told neural networks don't really work that well. So we were studying support vector machines.
Wait a second. Did they tell you that in grad school or did they tell you that in Lockheed?
Grad school.
Okay. Wow.
I think that, yes, they were still in the point of view at that point. That was, dating myself, but like 2010 to 2012 or so was when I was there. And that was like deep learning is interesting. Here's neural networks. You learn about them. You learn the math behind them. But like that doesn't really work in production. Here's something else. Here, use a support vector machine for this kind of work, or use any other kind of sequence-to-sequence model. So very different times. And then pretty shortly after that is when people started realizing, oh, we can scale these things up.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, after grad school, I left mostly because I really wanted to work on production AI products, and there weren't a lot of companies doing that. Microsoft reached out because they wanted to work on Cortana, this assistant. At the time, there were, the Windows Phone back then. So I helped working on natural language processing problems for Cortana. And then went and did very similar things, helping with Alexa, getting that kind of off the ground the early days, working at Amazon across the pond. Since then, I've had a chance to work on a bunch of cool AI products, doing some work for AWS and AI for games, and then working on PyTorch at Meta, the open source machine learning framework that most people use nowadays. One of the coolest projects out there. I was very happy to spend some time there before I started my company. And yeah, that's kind of, I guess, before the startup phase.
Before the startup phase. That's awesome. And I don't know if I can say this, but 15 years in machine learning, that makes your age somewhat like the age of a dinosaur in tech when it comes to MLAI. Is that a fair thing, Diamond?
That's pretty close. Rough estimate,
okay.
Yes.
And it is also, I think, super interesting that in order to be able to work in production, like 10, 15 plus years ago in machine learning and things like AI, you have had to have worked in very, very few projects and products out there. The kinds of things that you mentioned, Microsoft's Cortana, PyTorch, Alexa, these are all very recognizable names, but there were not too many of those production systems back then. So it's amazing to speak to someone like yourself who's been seeing this journey for quite some time. And then you went and, of all things, started a company called Augmend. Could you double click a bit on what was Augmend all about for those folks that may not be super familiar with it?
Yeah, of course. So my co-founder and I had known each other for probably a decade or so. My co-founder, Tim, he was a DevTools debugging guy, really likes that kind of stuff. And both of us were managing teams for a long time. And one of the things that we found was, as we kind of kept talking about pain points of managing large teams, was we felt there's a huge amount of waste in just the amount of time that's spent sharing information across teams, updating docs, really kind of sharing what we think of as like sharing memories across the team. And so this was a problem we really wanted to tackle. So Augmend was set up to figure out how could we actually take all the tribal knowledge that works across teams, put it into one place for a group, and make it very easy to automatically be able to understand what's going on. And we started with the DevOps space for this because we thought that was the biggest pain point. So if you're on call, you're handling an issue that's going on, you're a junior engineer that gets woken up at like 2 a.m, you want to be able to pull in and reach into the memories of the senior engineer on your team. How do I actually go and just like ask some simple questions of like, how do I debug this problem? Or how did we do this deployment? And most of the time, every engineer will tell you their runbook is pretty much always out of date. And you just end up having to like call this person in, this poor person in who's the most senior person on the team for many things. So we wanted to make it so that isn't what you had to do anymore. We built a series of products to test that idea. The main one was what I think of as like a Loom meets Copilot, where you kind of record what you're doing on screen, talk about it. You might show someone else on your team, hey, I'm trying to do this deployment, or I'm debugging this problem, or I'm handling this incident. And then when you're done, we had a series of multimodal models that would go across what you just did and extract structured information from it using visual, audio, as well as like clicks and everything you were doing on the screen to do things like writing and updating runbooks, building out the memory for an assistant that's shared across your team, and making it so that you can ask those questions and pull that information out of it and do this for everyone on the team.
Wow. This sounds very futuristic, especially considering when you started the company. And for reference, you started this company before 2024, didn't you?
Yes. I started the company in 2022.
Wow. Okay. That is, again, in the land of AI and everything that happens in generative AI, this was pretty early. And it's also extremely pertinent to anyone that has had to wake up early in the morning, all these people involved in DevOps, or for anyone that's had to like face customers who complain of things being down and not being attended to, SLAs and stuff. This stuff is extremely pertinent to a lot of different folks. So you did that. And then since then, your company got acquired by Datadog, which is amazing. One of the most well-recognized companies in the world, or I should say probably the most well-recognized company in the world for all things DevOps. So tell us a little bit about that. How was your journey going from Augmend to Datadog? And what are some key takeaways for you as a founder, having started and led Augmend?
So kind of key takeaways to start is that one of the things that we really want to get done was we want to solve these problems for customers at large enterprise companies, right? That's really where, if you're building this kind of technology, where it's the most useful. And this is where we had our background. We worked at places like Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook. Our group worked across a few others as well. And one of the downsides of trying to sell into enterprise, though, is that it's a very long cycle. And it's very hard to get access to early data to test ideas out, especially in the AI space, to be able to show, hey, this is working with your data. And especially back then, not that it's that long ago, but in 2022, people were very wary of bringing models in and allowing your data to go kind of outside of either your private cloud or off-prem. So one of the things that we kept struggling with, and this is one of the things that I learned and I'll do more of in the future for the next one too, is that these very long sales cycles mean that we have to get started very early with getting agreement to get into companies. And we were struggling to get a lot of that early data. And so we started talking to companies like Datadog and other platform companies who had this data but didn't have the kind of machine learning, or at least didn't have the exact type of product that we had. So we were hoping to be able to partner with them, or hoping to be able to partner with some of the other big companies that already have this kind of interaction data. Like, what are you doing? What's a dev doing? And as part of that discussion, we found that they were very keen to solve very similar problems for their users. And we were missing the chunk of information that they did have, which is like, how do we actually use this in production with a bunch of data at scale? So eventually we decided the right thing to do was to join them. I spent a lot of time talking to the leaders in the company and their founders. One of the reasons I am very excited about Datadog, and one of the reasons I'm here working on this problem right now, is they're still founder-led. So even though it's a public company, it's still very startup-like, and it's still very kind of deeply connected to the customer. Yeah, happy to go into anything else that I learned along the way, but that's like my, why did we even move to that sale, and how did we actually work with them?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Again, given that they have the word data in Datadog, they have all this data around what people are doing with it or could be doing with it, the stuff that they're collecting from production systems. And you are building all the innovative stuff around how to actually leverage this data and to enhance collaboration. Seems to fit like a glove. In addition to what you mentioned about the difficulty of getting access to production data, convincing large customers to try something new, like an innovative technology in production, what are some other learnings that, if you look back at how you did things, maybe you would want to do differently now?
Yeah, I think we had a lot of fun. We built something cool that was solving pain points for what we could see. But I'd say there's definitely a few areas that, if I can go back and change now, or what I'd like to do for the next one. One of them is that kind of always be selling or shipping to customers. As an engineer and as two co-founders who are both engineers, I feel like it's not always the thing that we're inclined to do, is to go out and always be selling every single day. For me, 8 sales meetings a week sound like a lot. And then I talk to like people who are running startups like this, one of the reasons I started upping my outreach was I talked to like a friend who was like, oh, I do like 16 a day. And I'm like, okay, that sounds insane. That doesn't sound fun. But also it seems like that's how you can do that early outreach. Like you have to always be having those discussions and always be selling because of that long sales cycle that's out there. The other part there is that related, I think I overvalued a lot of the like early people who want to try things out and didn't do a good enough job of selling into the very top people who actually need to sign the check. So like the senior engineers are like, yeah, I'd love to use this. The principal engineers who are like super excited about using it. But then like I have to get sign off from the CTOs, the CEOs. And that's back to the selling portion of like, I plan to for the next one if I do another enterprise one. And something I'm learning even within Datadog and continuing to do is do a better job at actually selling the vision to the CEOs and CTOs, even if they're not the ones using it every day. Because for enterprise, that's really important for that long-term sale. And then the one thing I'd say like I wouldn't change, but I think I'd lean even more into is that we built a small but relatively powerful team. And I think a lot of our best hires were people who were, the classic missionaries over mercenaries. Mm-hmm. And I would lean even more into that and really push hard to be comfortable hiring even a few more people like that who are like, yeah, they're really excited about the space. That's all they care about. That's all they live and breathe over necessarily like hiring a specialist, for example.
Yeah. First of all, I have to say, these are some extremely candid, very specific and tactical advice that a lot of founders can use. And also, I feel like it's sometimes easier to know that these are the right things to do, but not always easy to execute, right? It's easier to know that, yes, one has to have a big pipeline, have lots of conversations, validate problem before we jump into solution, whatnot. There's all that theory around that. But when it actually comes to it, it's not easy with the amount of limited time that we all have, spreading it thin between hiring and talking to potential users, to potential buyers. Like, who do you focus on? There's all this balance, which isn't easy. Which brings me to this next topic, Diamond. And I don't know to what extent you would agree, but it seems to me, at least as an investor, that dev tools are in particular notoriously hard to build a business out of. As in, a lot of, I want to say, startups start off as projects, oftentimes open source. They have decent usage, and there seems to be enough interest from the user community, perhaps even from the buyer community at some point, that it gives founders the confidence that, okay, maybe we could build a business around this. And unfortunately, it doesn't always end up being the case. Sometimes it takes an incredibly long time. Sometimes it takes an outrageous amount of money to build something that eventually becomes a business. So the question that I have for you coming in here as an investor is, what would you tell founders who are in the pre-seed and seed stage in particular, especially those who haven't raised obscene amounts of money, where they're seeing some initial signs of excitement, maybe there's a problem that is so obvious that it needs to be solved. There are lots of examples like that in dev tools. What would you tell these people based on your learnings at Augmend as to, you could pick any topic that you want to pick. It could be about raise more money than you think you need, or sell first and then build more only after you sell some initial stuff. Like, is there anything that you would say, if you agree to any of what I said, like in terms of the hardness of building a business as a dev tool, words of wisdom or advice that you would give early stage founders?
Yeah, I think it's a hard problem here. Dev tools are notoriously difficult. Thankfully, for better or worse, the people who like to build dev tool companies, no matter, even if you tell them it's particularly difficult, they'll still go try to build a dev tool company. I think I was told by many people that that's particularly difficult. I'll probably still try again one day. And that's okay. It's kind of like if you can tell someone not to do a startup and they don't do a startup, they probably shouldn't be doing a startup anyway. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I personally don't think that it's necessarily the size of the seed round to an extent. I think it's actually more what you're able to do with that in terms of the ability to grow the user base and sell. And I think that with a small team or a large team, you're going to have the same problem, which is you need to have some percentage of your folks dedicated just to that selling. And that could be the founders. That should, I think, at one point just be one of the founders. And it should be something that like every day, you're talking to people, you're getting feedback, you're selling, and you're kind of increasing that pipeline and really preparing for the fact that you're going to have a long sales cycle in enterprise. I think the main thing dev tool companies need is just to do that, right? Rather than just spend their time kind of building, or at least spend more of their time building. And I think one of the things that was always uncomfortable for me and my co-founder, I think too, and I've seen for other kind of founders like us, is we didn't always want to sell things we didn't have built. And this can feel disingenuous sometimes, but I think it is something that you have to get comfortable doing when you're talking about trying to go to where the puck's going, right? Skate to where the puck is going rather than what you have working today. And, you shouldn't be overselling,
Yeah.
but you should certainly be realistic about like, here's where we think we can go and sell that vision and that idea. It's not terribly dissimilar from like raising money, but it's like at another level of doing that to all these companies. And I think that tends to be one of the things that at least like I would tell someone. I also do think, at least in the AI world right now, there are a lot of AI tools companies that have raised too much. Like I don't think you need to raise 20, 30, 50, $100 million seeds unless you're building a model. If you're doing anything that's like infrastructure layer, application layer, tools for using it, that's probably overkill and might be a negative, not a positive.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of money raised, as a topic that I brought up was primarily because it seems like, again, companies that start off with something interesting, oftentimes they may even get to a decent chunk of users and even buyers and perhaps even 1 million in ARR, but it still doesn't have the semblance of a platform. It seems like it could be a feature within, like, say, a Datadog, right? And that is where I think sometimes enterprises also get stuck because they're like, okay, this sounds like something that Datadog could deliver in Q3 of this year. Like, why is this a full-fledged product that I should make a commitment to today? That sort of question.
That's certainly a risk, yeah. And I think that
Yeah.
you need to have a really good idea of your runway then in that case. We didn't raise that much, but I never felt like the money was the issue for us. It was like we still had a long runway going when we kind of decided to join Datadog. But certainly, I think we probably could have also used money differently. It's always hard to say
Of
2020
course, of course.
and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Hindsight 2020. Switching to some of the more contemporary topics that you're working on, specifically in Datadog, tell us a bit more about Bits.ai. It sounds really cool. And I also checked that you have a URL by that. So I was like, is that a different company, different division within Datadog? What is Bits.ai?
Yeah, so Bits.ai is really meant to be Datadog's overarching assistant. This is the AI agent or assistant that can do work for you on Datadog. I like to think about it as the way that we're going to automate away a lot of the work that any of your engineers or DevOps people or security people have to do that's rote or something that is like a relatively junior member of the team should be doing. We should be able to do that for you. I don't know if it's quite the right way to put it, but you should be using Datadog daily as a human less, and we should be doing more for you, though, and making it so you can have a smaller team over time. Under the hood, though, it's multiple agents. And that is things like right now, the term agents is hot, but really it's assistants that do things for you. And the way that to make those work is to be very job or task specific. So we have a series of agents that do particular jobs and interact with you through this Bits AI persona.
Got it. And when you say job or task specific, could you maybe give us a couple of examples, more concrete, like what kind of tasks come to mind?
Absolutely. So we're pretty early right now. These are all in a private beta, but they've been publicly shared. One is an on-call engineer. So if you're in the middle of an incident or an alert goes off and you're going to be woken up at 2 a.m, instead of you having to get up and even ask questions like my original goal for Augmend, instead is that this Bits will kind of get ahead when the alert goes off and start doing investigations for you. So it's part automated root cause analysis, part kind of like junior DevOps engineer who's going to like hop in, look at the run book, make some decisions, look at the data, look at the dashboards even, run some queries against logs, traces, metrics, try to decide what's going on, and then share that information with you just like another person on your team might. So that by the time you finally get to your computer, you might have this long list of things that's already checked that you don't have to anymore. And it will probably even have a couple hypotheses around what's going on. We're not yet at the stage where we're going to go like fix the problem right away yet. We're still at the human in the loop stage. But that's one set of jobs that we're handling. It's like, how do we actually make it so that all the debugging and investigation work that you normally do throughout Datadog can be handled for you automatically? Another one is looking at errors and then fixing them with code generation. It's a pretty obvious use case, but there aren't a lot of folks doing it quite this way. Most of the code gen systems out there are focused on like building out new products or just the developer part of the loop. But the DevOps part of the loop tends to be, hey, error comes up in the middle of a service. It may not have triggered an alarm yet because we haven't seen a lot of these errors, but we've seen a few. And we have enough information in places like Datadog or any other observability product that's out there to make a decision on like, maybe we should patch this. Maybe we should add a test for it later. Maybe we should like recommend some code. And we can automatically create a PR for you and make a recommendation. Again, just like the on-call engineer agent, we don't want Bits to yet go and merge it in and like deploy it to production. We don't feel like we're quite at that quality level, or models really aren't quite at that quality level. But we can save you that time of looking through your errors, trying to figure out what's going on, looking at your application monitoring, and then not having to write the code either, because all you do is do the code review and bring it into your system if you like it.
These are all extremely specific and I'm sure pretty useful for companies who are doing this day in and day out with real human beings involved. And it sounded like from what you said, the eventual goal is to have more and more automation and less human in the loop, at least as far as the more confidence that you get in the models and the code that is generated and things like that. Is that fair to say, Diamond?
Absolutely. A big focus for us and for anyone building these kind of LLM-powered agents is evaluation. So a lot of what we're doing right now is building eval, making sure that it's reaching the quality we want so that customers can trust it, and testing that with a series of private beta customers and dog fooding. We probably dog food the most for any of these products. We're just using them every day in our systems. And then as they reach better and better quality, and that definition of quality differs for a code gen agent, it might be it's good enough quality that we'll submit PRs, but we might not. And as long as we trust the test, we might run them through an automatic deployment process, but we're not going to deploy straight to prod or anything. For on-call engineer, it might be good enough that certain actions we're comfortable with, like rolling back or scaling up or scaling down. But we're still going to have some guardrails around those systems. But the long-term goal is how can you actually automate away the time people have to actually spend in these tasks, except for any of the like common use cases. There's many complicated and long tail use cases that we won't be able to automate away for a long time.
For sure, for sure. It's cool that you're dogfooding all this while building it and don't have to just rely on Datadog's customers. I'm sure they're relieved to hear it too. But kidding aside, so you have, as I take it, on-call engineers supporting Datadog who are dogfooding this too, right?
Yep.
Okay. And how was that? I'm curious to know when your own on-call engineers initially, caught wind of Bits.ai, how was the reception to that? Were they insecure? Were they worried it might take away their jobs? How did you guys go about it?
Yeah, so most of this, I would say, like any of the jobs we're taking away right now are things that are just part of someone's larger job, and usually the things they don't like doing. So like most of our services, we don't have folks who are like dedicated just to being on call. They're developers who are on call. So like they would much rather be spending their day writing code than dealing with issues that come up. Definitely don't want to be woken up at 2 a.m. Same for like error fixing. It's a lot of our developers who like normally they do this as part of their job. Now they can kind of slowly move away from that. But we've spoken also to like SREs and DevOps engineers at other companies and internal. Their jobs are far more expansive than this. And this is kind of taking away a lot of the like rote part that's necessary, not necessarily their favorite parts. I think just like developers might be a little bit worried about code gen models, I see it less as a taking away an entire job and more augmenting people who are there. So you might need fewer because they're better, they're faster, they're able to do a lot more with these systems. But that means that the others can do other things that we might want to do. I think someone said there's like an infinite number of software applications we could be building. And the more capabilities we have, the more we kind of move up the stack. It's like I don't write most of my applications in C anymore, like I might have in like 2008. I use Python. It's a much higher level language, but I wouldn't say it took away jobs from software developers. It's actually made it so we have far more software developers or far more people writing software, at least. I don't know if they would all consider themselves to be software developers. I think it's a very similar situation here.
Got it. And I know you mentioned the product is still in beta, but whether it be from your own internal dogfooding experience or in putting Bits.ai in front of your beta customers, are there any other lessons that you can share that you learned in especially leveraging AI agents? You did mention about eval and the work that you are all doing in order to engender more trust from the end user community standpoint. Anything else that you can share with folks who are building with agents?
Absolutely. We have a few kind of key lessons, I'd say. There's probably 4 categories. One is how do you do eval and how do you scope tasks for eval? I can talk more about each of these. 2 is how do you kind of build out a team that is able to take on this new space? 3 is the importance of observability. I know I work at Datadog now, so that's probably what anyone at Datadog would say, but I also think it is terribly important, and we find more and more of that every day. And then 4 is really like UX problems. So scoping tasks for eval, this is why I was talking about jobs to be done. We're really not in a world where generalization works for agents yet. And we find that as we use them every day, you see a lot of other companies that are trying to use them that say similar things. So it's really important that you actually are comfortable building out task-specific vertical agents that have these like scope jobs to be done that are measurable and verifiable. And if you can verify this, you're in a great spot because many people are trying to do tasks that can't really be measured well or can't be verified. And that makes it very hard to improve them. So for us, that's things like, okay, is our agent getting better at finding the root cause or getting better at writing code that's actually solving a real error? We can measure that. We can verify it. We can build out test sets for that. And that's where like eval comes into play. Is like, do you really have a good offline eval process, an online eval process? And is that a living, breathing process where you're adding new data, you're annotating new information, you're sampling, you're handling things like drift detection, you have a good release process, and you're learning every day from what people are doing.
And before you proceed, Diamond, so this is fascinating because correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is that the evals that you're talking about are very task and also domain specific. So if you're building it
Mm-hmm.
for Bits.ai, it's very much geared towards the kinds of tasks that you want to automate or have some kind of semi-automation around. Is that accurate?
That's right. And I think that's the other part of eval that I think many people know now as they start to dig into it. But your domain specific eval for these kind of jobs is far more important than some benchmark that's out there. We can all read SweetBench. We can all read any of the number of like really cool benchmarks that people say like my model's doing better this time. But you have to have a really good way to take a harness, grab the new model, throw it into your system and compare with your evals, not just some evals that are out there to know if it's actually improving for your customers.
Mm-hmm. That is cool. That is cool. That's super helpful. And then I think you mentioned the second topic to be around building a team that is working on products like this.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities to what I mentioned about like learning how to build a team for a startup. And I think because the early stage of these like agents or AI systems today is in this world where things are changing so fast, where it's kind of fuzzy, you have to be always learning, you have to always be picking new things up. There's some very similar problems where you really, really want people who are, I don't know, missionaries or explorers, people who really want to learn more and dig into the AI problems that are out there and stay up with it and are less on the side of like, hey, this is a like 6-month development process, 1-year development process that we're just kind of getting tasks and finishing them because things change every single day. And hiring for startups to me is very similar. You want people who are have a lot of agency and people who are like willing to just go and try new things out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I just feel like this can be said for anyone who wants to keep up with the latest and greatest. Even as a much less technical user, I just find myself having to go and keep myself updated on what's the latest and greatest way of generating an image, even because
Yep.
even those things are not the same. Yeah, all the time.
It's changing every day.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then there's not enough ML experts to go around either. It's like we talked about like 10 years ago, there were very few. And I think now that's playing out where you are not going to have an entire team of machine learning, like people who've been doing machine learning AI for a decade. That might not even be good because they did very different things back in the day. The second part of this to me is always like you should seed your team with a couple ML or AI experts, but then you should build around that. A lot of people who like Swix from the AI engineer group might call them AI engineers rather than like machine learning engineers or applied scientists, people who know how to use AI as they develop, but they're generalists who just move fast.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you're saying it's important or better to have a team that has AI engineers or traditional like ML engineers?
Who are seated with a traditional ML engineer or two, but that's
Mm-hmm.
not the majority of your team. So if you have like a
Gotcha.
20-person team or a 10-person team that's trying to build something new,
Mm-hmm.
you might have 1 or 2 people like that. You
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't have 0 because you might get stuck in kind of local minima problems where they just don't really know what they should be measuring, or a scientist or 2 who can help guide the team.
Mm-hmm.
But then the vast majority of your team should be generalists who are willing to move fast and learn.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be the type of people are calling AI engineers who like, they're good at prompt engineering, get a feel for how to use models, but their skill is really the software development, not just the AI work.
Not the AI piece. And if you were to start Augmend today, Diamond, leveraging today's technology, do you still think you would want to have some AI scientists in your team, or do you think software developers, the explorer types, combined with some AI engineers would be sufficient?
I would still probably have 1 scientist, and I did have 1 scientist. And even now today for Datadog, I'd say each of my major teams, we have 4 teams, each of the
Mm-hmm.
major teams has like 1 or 2 scientists assigned. Because of that, you still want 1 or 2 people who are just going to be thinking deeply about the problem and helping guide the team. And they might not be the ones that are solving the problem to get it out to customers and get that feedback initially, but they're the ones that help set up the right data pipelines. They're the ones that help set up how do we fine tune this thing over time? How do we actually set up our own eval process? And they give the guidance to the rest of the engineers. And that could be an ML engineer, that could be a scientist. It depends on the type of person that fills that role. But I think if you don't have that, you end up in a spot which I found for many teams and even kind of early days of some of the work that we did, where it's very easy to get to a demo and it's very
Mm-hmm.
hard to improve it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is also reaching the local maxima problem is
Yes.
something that happens, like you mentioned. And then I think the third thing that you mentioned is obviously importance of observability. For observability, especially at Datadog, how are you approaching that problem?
Yeah, a lot of it is that we think that you have to have observability into not just what is your software system doing, but what is your
Mhm.
model doing, especially when you're dealing with things like off-box calls to OpenAI and the like, or if you need to make like 50 to 100 calls as part of like an agent interaction. Some people, these loops are created where an agent might make 20, 50, 100, 200 calls out to make a decision. And it's very hard to parse if you just use kind of standard like logs and traces. And one of the things that we found is that we're really leaning into a more like agent view of the observability process, where you might see the actual workflows and be able to trace through what did the agent do, where did it stop, where did it reason. Datadog has a product that we've been kind of giving feedback into to get this view built out, which is called LLM observability. And the reason for having a separate observability product that plugs into the rest of it, though, is that to give you these views that are very specific to the agent or to the LLM or to the application that cares about this. But then on the flip side, you still have kind of the single pane of glass that you can see the end to end throughout the application and plug in that agent view as well.
Mhm. And this kind of observability, very, very fine grained that you're referring to, is that mostly for the purpose of helping you debug or help improve performance, latency? Like, is it more reactive, proactive, or when does it become important?
It's important pretty early on because of the debugging aspect.
Mhm.
So there's two reasons that this is important in the beginning. One is just that it's very easy for these stochastic models to do something weird that you have not seen or can't repro. That your customer comes and says like, hey, or like in our case, someone in our organization says, it did this weird thing. I can't get it to repro now. Why did it do that? Or why did it fail at this step? It's like, okay, well, it's one of 60 steps. Let me go and see if I can get it to reproduce the exact workflow. Or you have everything logged appropriately and a view that you can kind of quickly jump in and say, oh, there's the error. Here is the input and output to the model. I can see right there that the context that we provided was incorrect. And that was because this tool call here didn't quite get the right info. And it's very fast kind of situational awareness, I'd say, on the debugging side and the reactive side. And then there is this proactive side that you asked about, which is with enough data, which is like once you're kind of have maybe 10 people using it or 20 companies using it, you start to see clusters and trends of information that we can automatically infer based on these logs and traces throughout the system. So you can say, hey, we're really not answering questions. Like there's a group of these interactions that the agent tries to get answers for from the model that the model always comes back with no answer.
Mm.
Or there's this area where your customers are saying a lot of profanity. Maybe you should dig in there and figure out why. Maybe something else is going on.
Or
That kind
maybe
of
it's
stuff
an
is like a
agent
layer on top
on
of
the customer
it.
side doing all that automatically.
It may very well be. And that's the
Yeah.
kind of stuff that if you don't have a view into it, you're just kind of guessing and hoping that people will give you that feedback or like just sifting through your logs and hoping for the best.
Mhm, mhm. This is fascinating, mainly because you're obviously referring to observability within what traditionally we thought of as observability. So we're having to
Hmm.
peel multiple layers of this onion. And then I think the next category that you mentioned is very actually dear to my heart. It's about user experience, especially in the age of AI. So how's that playing out for you?
It's still very early. The reason I like to mention it when we talk to anyone about product problems and areas to move faster in, as well as things we're learning, is that we definitely can see that the old way of defining UXs is changing. An agent is doing things for you. They might be taking action for you. They might be trying to show you some information. They're acting a lot
Mhm.
more like a human. It doesn't work to just go and build a bunch of buttons or like go and build a bunch of like new screens where this agent's going to try to talk to you on a particular web page. It actually becomes kind of like possibly annoying, the Clippy like experience where it's just like
Yep.
popping up all over the place.
Mhm.
So we're exploring different ways to work on that. I think a lot of it, the way I see it, and the way I'm not the UX designer expert by any means, but the way that our UX designers think about it and the way that I see it evolving is that we're trying to meet users where they are, just like another human might. Again, so that might mean things like let's do a really good job at using the existing tools that someone on your team might use, reaching out over Slack, sending you an async update over email, like the kind of things that don't just become in your face new applications I have to use all the time.
Mhm.
It's hard for Datadog or any application that's a SaaS product to do that because it is a change of mindset where you're like, hey, I have something I need to show a customer. That needs to be a panel that shows up on the screen. And
Yep.
sometimes that's true, but many times it just becomes a lot of info that's being shown at the same time, especially since people also want to do things like see the reasoning behind it right now to earn
Mhm.
that trust. You can see this with any of the new models that are out or that do reasoning models. They show the thinking trace right now. And a lot of that is because you want to explain why you did something. And that's a big part of UX with the current AI agents. But you need to do it in a way that doesn't just clutter everything up.
For sure. And you also want to know whether it is thinking enough, not too much, not too little.
Yep.
There's so much nuance in all this. This is really a fascinating topic. And I think it's also a good segue into something you talked about how Bits.ai and Datadog, you're focused on things for specific tasks. And we talked about roles like on-call engineers and some of the tasks that, as you put it, the rote tasks that many on-call engineers are trying to do that you're trying to automate. But still, we are talking about humans who have certain titles within companies when we talk about SREs and software developer and so on. So the question I have for you is the following. As we speak right now, there are so many companies and products that seem to be talking about doing something for a human functional role, be it a software developer, on call engineer in this case, things like that. But at the same time, as we've been discussing, the role of these people themselves are changing because they're leveraging these AI agents and whatnot. And a lot of times, like especially going back to what you were referencing around AI engineers today versus ML engineers from 2 years ago, even those things are changing. So, what is the conceptual model that, as a product manager or someone like yourself, is having as you're thinking about building products with an eye to the future? When all these roles are evolving and you're thinking of product roadmaps, how do you think about this? Is it persona specific or does it have to be more task specific moving forward?
I still try to think of it very persona specific because I think that that's where a lot of these, even though we're solving jobs and particular tasks, their jobs are tasks for a particular persona.
Mhm.
So until we get to a point where that persona may shift completely, I try to think about it for an actual persona. But the second part here is that I do, and me and the PMs in our group and a lot of us talk a lot about what does it mean for models to get smarter and cheaper every month, every quarter, every year, and try to build toward the future where that keeps happening. And the big assumption there is like, you cannot assume that the current models are anywhere near tapped out on capabilities. And I think that's a lot of what makes it a lot of unknown in the future, but also makes it so that you have to build a very big thinking roadmap.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, it is definitely a challenging role to play, having any sort of a roadmap if you're working on anything generative AI, but very fascinating. So, speaking of agents for a bit, I think you did mention about Bits AI being this. I don't want to like use the wrong term here, but you referred succinctly to how you see Bits AI as a collection of agents.
Yeah,
How did you put it?
it's the Datadog assistant, but under the hood of the Datadog assistant is a collection of agents that do work for you.
Gotcha. And so, within the context of Datadog here, Diamond, how are you thinking about orchestrating all these different agents? Is there like a central team, an architecture that you have so that you make sure that your on call engineer agent or an agent for a task A doesn't go and interfere with task B and C and so on?
Yeah, this is a genuinely hard problem, one that we've seen come up already a few times because it's not just my teams are the main ones building out these agents, but every so
Mhm.
often, like any of these kind of technologies, you'll see
Who
someone go, "Oh,
doesn't
that's
want to
really
build
cool."
agents these days,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. You'll see someone say like, "I'm just going to go build one too," and you're like, "Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, awesome." Yeah, like you should. I want everyone to be building them, but you have this problem, like you said, where they might clobber each other. Like a customer might be confused, like, "Why do I have like these two things both trying to do something for me?" So the way we're trying to work it out is that we're thinking a lot about what does it mean to have, again, this kind of shared assistant that many agents can run underneath. It reminds me a lot of how we solved a bit of this problem in the Alexa days. Very different tech. But, Alexa was this assistant you interacted with. But under the hood, there were different domains. And each of those domains may have had a series of other models that were running, or a series of at least business logic that you could use. There's the music domain, who handled, there's some people who all they thought about was how do we actually make it easier for Alexa to play music and answer questions about music and do all those things. But there was still a layer on top of that that handled the interaction with the human and decide if it was going to route to that domain. There was the smart home domain who handled things turning off and on your lights, doing all these different things. And a variety, a long tail of these where like they were each different teams. There's some downside to that in those days where maybe it wasn't a coherent model that one model could have done better. And that's what the new Alexa is doing now, from what I understand. So I don't expect that we'll be in a world where we'll route to different models, but I do think that we're working on making it easy for anyone to plug in their business logic for their domain to the single assistant that we have here, or let an agent run that just handles that particular domain. And we can have this layer that is the bits layer that you're talking to that can then call out to the right agent as you go forward.
So it sounds like you do have a central orchestration layer that, I mean, if someone comes and tells you, hey, Diamond, this is one of those long tail things that I've not been able to convince you to put it on your roadmap, then they can basically make the case for why they have to have an agent for it too. But then you can point to what you have as part of the core Bits.ai, like orchestration infrastructure, and say, okay, you can do that as long as you conform to this. Is
That's
that?
the idea. It's still
Mhm.
early in figuring out how this is all going to work exactly, because right now we have a small number of agents. I think it
Sure.
becomes complicated as you talk about many,
How
many
many do you
agents. That
have?
we have two major ones that are with private beta customers, which are the on-call engineer and the software developer that I mentioned. And then we're trying out two others right now. And it really depends on how you define an agent too. Like
Sure.
within each of these agents, we have probably 3 or 4 to 10 things that I would say like could be agents that look at
Mhm.
different parts of the system and run in a loop.
Mhm.
But that's the high level product agents I would think of them as. And there's a few others that are kind of popping up here and there that we want to work on. But the important part there is kind of building out shared building blocks, I'd say, that anyone can pick up in a more self-serve manner as much as possible. That's
Mhm.
the chat interactions, being able to just plug into the chat. That's making it easy for agents to pass context between each other. If I was just solving a problem with the coding agent, and then I want to follow up and see how the service is doing, and I want to move on to the on-call agent or some other agent that might answer questions about that, I shouldn't have to go and repeat myself again when I start talking to the new one. There's this like natural language understanding that's called contextual carryover, knowing what parts of the conversation should keep going. And then there's like the dialogue management problem in general of like when you talk with something like ChatGPT, it remembers some parts of your conversation, but maybe not all. And there's a similar issue here where you want Bits, this assistant for Datadog, to know what you were just talking about, where you were just working. And it shouldn't matter to the customer that it was a different agent because they're talking to the single coherent Bits experience.
This is really cool. And I think this is what will make it really, really advantageous for a company such as Datadog that is creating multiple different agents, one maybe for on-call, DevOps, and all these different kinds of persona, because you can say, well, if you buy this on-call thing from Datadog, you can carry the context over when you decide to do such a thing for your DevOps engineer or someone else. So I think this is one of the reasons I think for startups that start just in one piece, it is a little bit of an uphill battle if they have to compete with the likes of Datadog. But nevertheless, it's the right way to solve the problem. I guess a related question I have, if I were to ask you to put yourselves in the shoes of the CIO of a large enterprise, as an example, if you were the CIO of Bank of America, and I'm pretty sure that she or he are hearing pitches from obviously big companies like Datadog to other big companies in the software dev tooling space about agents day in and day out. And I'm sure they have companies all the way from sales and marketing tools talking to them about agents. And then in the middle of all this, they also see these developer tools that their own engineers are being able to quickly pick up and build a prototype with. So if you're sitting in their shoes and if you are thinking, hey, how much of this I should build versus buy, how would you suggest they think about it? It's not a fair question to ask you, I know, but you are a technologist, I would say much more so than anyone in the CIO organization of, say, a Bank of America. And hopefully they're not listening to this. So that's why I ask you this question.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think every engineering team struggles with that too. It looks like you can build something quickly with a lot of these tools.
Mm-hmm.
So what's worth building and what's not? I kind of go back to the focus on what makes your beer taste better, right? I think like the acquired guys talk about this. I think it was a Jeff Bezos quote. It's the AWS problem of like, do you really want to be racking servers and like focusing on parts of things that are not related to your core application or your core product? Probably not. That's not where your team should be spending their time. And even if you think you can do it, and you probably can, you just have better things to be spending time on. So I think, and I tell my own team this when we're building things, go and grab and try out things that are not part of our core product all the time. Like you don't need to go and build a new prompt comparison layer. If there's a company selling that, try that first. Let's see if that works. If that works good enough, great. Don't spend your time on it, right? Like go and
Mm-hmm.
make the agents better. That's what you should be spending time on. And if I'm working at a financial firm, I probably want to be the one that builds the agents that are doing research for me, that are
Mm-hmm.
getting information for my core traders, my core research analysts, everyone like that, because that is what makes my beer taste better and something that I have a moat in, something that I can do a better job with. But I don't want to be building another Glean or building out a new DevOps agent or building out all these things that are more, I can buy. I can let someone else hit their head against that and make them really good.
Yeah, this is a super commonsensical wisdom that you just shared. Yeah, and I think that makes a ton of sense. Although it's going to be a lot harder to come to that conclusion, especially if you're a big enterprise, and it looks like it's easier than ever to get started on some shiny new project here using Gen AI.
It's true. And like maybe we should allow some of that to happen, right? I think there's nothing wrong with a lot of custom software. Like
Yep.
you might find some really interesting things that will be cool, but still probably not what you just want to spend most of your time on right now.
Absolutely. We're coming towards the end of, wow, it's been an hour, hard to say. What are any parting words of wisdom that you might have for founders that are starting out today?
Yeah, I think the big thing is just think big. Think about the fact that we're going to be in a world where the capabilities of these models continue to accelerate. And if you're working on AI-powered products, you should just assume they're going to be far better and far cheaper over the next few years and build like that's going to happen. Build for that to occur. If you're working on non-AI products, you have this tailwind now where, like you said, it's easier to write software. It's easier to build tools. It's easier to just go and try things out with a small team. You should be comfortable with going and building a lot and trying a lot out and using these AI tools to help yourself accelerate faster. So overall, I think, techno-optimists are going to win in this world going forward. The people who kind of really are optimistic about where things are going and bet on that. So that's what I would say right now to anyone starting a company is that you have a lot of tailwinds right now. And that means you should just be thinking as big as possible.
Love it. I'm definitely on the side of techno-optimists here. Diamond, this was an amazing conversation. Lots of diamonds pickled in this conversation. And I'm sorry to throw that in. I'm sure you've heard that many times, but I really, really mean it. I think you offered so many words of wisdom here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Enterprise GTM podcast. Subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on your favorite podcast platform so we can continue to help enterprise founders thrive.